Welcome. So this is the brief check-in after the Meaningless Questions raffle. How to ask brilliant questions. So I think probably those of you who have logged on, let me just make sure that we are all loaded up. I may have to swap out our view here real quick to have our folks on Zoom join us. All right, let's go ahead and start this practice session. Start webinar. Let's get started.
Recording in progress.
Excellent. Okay, so my name is Tom Mullaney. I'm joining you from Stanford and also Where Research Begins. And we're here to talk about asking questions in research. And in particular, asking questions about those very exciting but fragile opening seconds and minutes of our first encounter with a primary source, whatever that primary source might be for you. It could be, in my case, I'm an archival historian. It could be an archival document. It could be a photograph. It could be a data set. It could be an ethnographic encounter or situation. And the question is, what are the questions that we should be asking or can be asking of those encounters? So my colleague Chris Ray and I, we put together sort of a fun game to both win prizes, and we have one of the prize winners in the audience I see today. Both to win prizes that are kind of cool, but also just as a way to dive into the research process and to hone our skills and, above all, the ability to ask questions. Asking questions should, in theory, be very easy. As human organisms, we're constantly noticing things in our environment. But as it turns out, the ability to translate those very human acts of noticing into questions has been sort of beaten out of us by our education system from basically high school onward. That kind of raw curiosity tends to be dominated or overshadowed by what Chris and I refer to as performative intelligence, the desire to impress authority figures and to make people think we're smart rather than acting upon the instinct of whatever it is that we're noticing. We're afraid to ask questions we think are stupid. We're afraid to reveal what we do not know. We think to ourselves, who am I to ask this or that question? I'm sure someone much smarter than me has already answered this, etc., etc. So this game, Meaningless Questions, this raffle that we've been running, is just meant in a fun way to help us overcome that ability. So the point of this little webinar is to show how our winner this week won the game, but also show how even our winner could have asked 3 times as many questions, and instead of just eking out the competitor to win the prize, which was a cool camera, could have just blown them out of the water. So I'm going to teach some very basic tricks and tips and techniques you can use to radically increase your MQ, the ability to ask these meaningless questions. And I'm going to talk about how and why it is that we even want to be able to do this, and sort of what comes next. And then this is going to also try to help those who are going to take the next raffle, try to win the next raffle, do an even better job. Okay, so let me go ahead and see if Ecamm Live will behave and allow me to do this. I hope and trust that I'm out there on various platforms right now. I'm trying to record and live stream at the same time. So how to ask brilliant questions. The first thing you need to know is brilliant questions do not come from brilliant people. Genius questions are not the cognitive product of genius people. We have to give up on that idea. Either everybody is a genius, which I actually do believe, or genius questions are not a function of just intelligence or brilliance. There is something else at play. Chris and I often think of an equation, and kind of a nested equation. I should have drawn this. I'll do it next time. The first part of the equation is something that all human beings and organisms do, which is we take notice of the world around us. We're bombarded by stimuli. We take notice of a tiny fraction of those stimuli. So the first part of the equation is just taking notice of the things and worlds around us. That's not something you have to work on. That comes with the hardware of being a human being, being an organism in the world. The second part of the equation, however, is what educators refer to as metacognition, cognition about cognition, thinking about thinking. And this is the ability not just to notice things, often unconsciously, but to notice what you are noticing, to take notice of what you are noticing. To say, hey, wow, I'm really noticing the flora and fauna. I'm really noticing the color of the leaves around me. I'm really noticing the crack patterns on the sidewalk as I walk down the road to the post office box, whatever it is. The metacognitive act of noticing what you are noticing. And then the third and key phase to the production of brilliant questions is taking action on that which you have noticed, Literally giving yourself permission to look into that which you have noticed. So it's a kind of a nested equation. And if we could get more people not to notice things, everybody's noticing things, but to get more people to notice what they're noticing, and then at an educational, a socio-political level, to grant themselves the permission that is often beat down out of them, out of society and upbringing and various forms of enduring structural inequalities, lots of different ingredients, to overcome those, to give permission to the researcher just to look into things. This is what sets us down the road of some of the most paradigm-shifting questions ever asked. Continental drift, leaping genes, CRISPR technology, shrinkflation, the current rewriting of the Greco-Roman world, where now we understand it to be this colorful Mardi Gras-like environment, not the pristine alabaster white. All of these paradigm-shifting discoveries emerge out of this very basic three-part equation and begin fundamentally with the asking of what Chris and I refer to as a meaningless question. So the source that we used for this last raffle, we have the, let's see if that's going to work, was this. This was the source that many of you saw who took part in the raffle. It is a nutrition label, the kind that you would find on the side of a cereal box or the side of a milk container within North America on every product. I think, I don't know. And it's it's a familiar one. It's telling us the caloric quantity, the serving size, the components out of which it is made in terms of saturated fat and cholesterol and so forth. And the instruction that everyone had in the raffle was, in a week and day by day, ask as many meaningless questions as you can of this source as possible, where meaningless is defined in two very, very basic ways. One, do not try to impress me. Do not talk about Foucault and biopolitics and late-stage capitalism and the Anthropocene. Don't try to strut your stuff. I already assume you're smart. Don't try to impress anyone around you with your intelligence. Instead, allow yourself to give yourself the permission to ask a question that just occurs to you. Why is the font size for 280 so much larger than the font size for total fat or total carbohydrate? Why are some things bolded and some things not bolded? Why is the trans in trans fat italicized? Saturated fat is 4.5 grams. Trans fat is 0. 4.5 plus 0 does not equal 9 grams. What are the fats that are not included in this label? What do the colors mean? Who decided that 1 cup is a serving size? Etc., etc., etc. None of these are attempting to be impressive questions. And none of them are trying to make meaning out of the source. So some people ask, why do Chris and I refer to them as meaningless questions? Happy to field that, when we get to a bit more of the Q&A, and I'll be monitoring the various platforms we're streaming and recording to. So, what did this look like? What were some of the questions, some of the meaningless questions that you actually asked? I see at least three of the competitors. Actually, no, my gosh, there are probably seven of the competitors are in the audience right now. Very cool. Ben, hey, Hrant, hey, Daniel, hey, Jen, hey, awesome. So, what were some of the questions that you asked in this competition, this fun raffle? Well, you asked hundreds and extending into thousands of questions collectively. At the maximum over the course of a week, I think each of you maxed out close to 100 thereabout. That was no one extended to 200. But collectively, there were over 800 questions posed, distinct questions posed about this FDA nutrition label. How big must this label be to be approved for usage? How do you determine how many calories are in a food? How would a nutrition facts label in binary or hexadecimal or some other base be used, and how would one use these alternatives? Is low too low? Is the cholesterol the bad kind or the good kind? So there's lots of different questions going on. This is a small fraction of the ones that you ask, but congratulations, these are meaningless questions. These fulfill the first of the two criteria. None of these are trying to be impressive. The second criteria or definition of a meaningless question, which these also fulfill, is you're not supposed to limit the questions you ask to being relevant, let's say. So this is a nutrition label, so I guess I have to ask nutrition questions. What's a good nutrition question? Don't worry about that. That was the instruction. You could ask a nutrition question, something explicitly about that, but you could also ask about the chemical composition of the ink that it was used to print. You could ask about the paper pulp out of which maybe this milk carton was made. You could ask questions that are sort of orthogonal to what the source is about. You can let yourself be irrelevant and go in any number of directions. X-axis, Y-axis, Z-axis, alpha, beta, gamma. You are doing that right here. So awesome. So if anyone wants to take part in the meaningless question raffle that's going to come up, this is a fantastic starter set of what a meaningless question looks like. All right. So the question now is, how do we ask more of these meaningless questions? Because as impressive as all of the contestants were, there was a lot of low-hanging fruit that was not exploited. Now, I have to say there are obviously limits on the raffle itself. You can only ask, I think, 20 of these questions per time, but I don't believe that the winners of this contest asked 20 questions each time. What that means, and this is no shade on those of you, on Hrant, our great winner, no shade to be meant, but it is interesting that when given this limitless thing, that most of the time we sort of run out of gas. Our battery exhausts itself after 10 or 15 or 20 questions. It's amazing. And what's really amazing is you take an undergraduate and you take a full professor at an Ivy League school and you give them this task, they tend to run out of steam in the same amount of time their first try. So again, there's something about our instinctual ability to ask these raw questions, which, despite the fact that our human organism is totally able to ask them, is kind of systematically beat out of us the further and further we proceed in higher education. So how do we counteract that? How can we kind of go back to the gym and make sure that the full musculature of our intelligence is kind of balanced? We don't want to be imbalanced towards performative intelligence, the kind that can talk about the Anthropocene and late-stage capitalism and Deleuze and rhizomatic blah, blah, blah. We don't want to just be that. We also want to counterbalance that with the ability to ask 100, 200, 300 meaningless questions like that. So let me give you just one tip. There's a few ways to do this, but let me give you one right away. And this is if-then conditional logic. So remember, meaningless question means don't try to impress me and let yourself be irrelevant. It doesn't limit you on making conditional guesses as to the answer to one of your prior meaningless questions. And so, for example, let's take one question that was asked. How was a 2,000 calorie, target calculated as the baseline? That's a great meaningless question. It's open-ended. It is specific. It's not trying to sound smart. It leads us in the direction of a particular source. Like, it is actually conceivably, theoretically possible that a source exists which would allow us to answer this question. That's another feature of meaningless questions, is that they can be answered, unlike questions about late-stage capitalism. And so what we can do in order to turn this one meaningless question into dozens is by using if-then logic. So we ask this first question, and then we simply pose ourselves hypothetically, if it turns out that nutritionists chose a specific demographic, they literally started with a kind of able-bodied 25-year-old male, with this level of education in this part of the country, and they started with a particular demographic and then built out, extrapolated out a whole set of requirements and recommendations for nutrition, then my next series of meaningless questions would be, who was the first test subject? What was their name? How was this person recruited? What was the demographic? What was the age group? What was the gender? What was the part of the country? What was the education level? What nation state are we talking about? Was it urban or rural? All of those are conditional meaningless questions, meaning that if the answer turns out to be something different, then those sort of evaporate in some ways. But what's interesting is that they often, even when the answer to our first meaningless question turns out to not be one that we have, if then, those meaningless questions actually can be recycled in interesting ways. So they still are at your disposal. So Hrant or Ben or Daniel had lots of questions in their list, which could have easily been if then. And then if the answer is that the real answer is that nutrition scientists decided that it's actually 2004 calories. But 2004 is very hard to remember, so it was rounded down. If that's the case, then my next series of meaningless questions would be, are there any other round numbers in science that are round purely because of that they're easier to remember, almost a marketing PR dimension to that? And for that matter, when I go back to the nutrition label, is anything else here being rounded up or down? And so suddenly this one question through if-then logic can become 5, 10, and so forth. Again, if it's based on a study done in a particular nation state, what was the nation state? So if-then logic is one way that we can turn one meaningless question into at least 5, 10, 20. And again, it's conditioning our mind to stay in this place of inquiry. Similarly, here's another question that was asked by someone who took part. When is a phrase capitalized? So there's kind of weird capital letters and lowercase letters going on in the nutrition label. Who decides? This is an awesome meaningless question. You can find, theoretically, there is a source or multiple sources that would allow us to begin answering this. Let's say the answer is it's a government subcommittee that decided. Literally, there's a style guide that tells you for a nutrition label which words do and do not need to be capitalized. If that's the case, what is this subcommittee called? Who is on it? How is it recruited? Is it appointed by federal employee? Or is this an elected council, or is it an appointment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? So one meaningless question can quickly become 10. If it's left up to the manufacturer gets to decide what is capitalized and what is not. Well, then the question becomes, what else on the nutrition label, if that's the case, what else on the nutrition label is left up to the manufacturer to decide versus what is mandated? And that's another meaningless question. If the rules are encoded in federal law, what is the statute? Was there a court case that led to this? So again, if-then logic is one technique to turn one meaningless question into, again, 10, 20, even more along the way. So next time, when it's time to win, I want you to try to use some of these techniques. Another way to do this, and then I'll check the Q&A. It's a little bit hard to see where all the different platforms are. So if you've asked a question, I promise to get there soon, is to start exploring what Chris and I refer to as new dimensions of inquiry. I know some of you already have the meaningless question flashcards or the virtual cards, so you know what a dimension of inquiry is. On our website, on whereresearchbegins.com, in the meaningless questions section, you'll see them. The virtual cards look like this. So bind is a dimension of inquiry that we talk about. Mimic is a dimension of inquiry. Matter. And if you click on it, the card flips. It explains what the dimension of inquiry is, how you can ask more questions from the vantage point of this dimension. And there are 25 of these dimensions in all in the first set. There's 100 that we'll eventually release. But the idea here is very, very, very simple. So you can actually sort of test out what is your MQ, what is your MQ style, your meaningless question style, and we're actually going to create a little online quiz that you can do this on your own. But let's say that you took part in this raffle or you took part in this exercise. What I would want to do is I would want to take a question from that list, and I would first want to ask myself, what kind of question is this? So what is a calorie? And I love this question because it's honest and the person isn't afraid of sounding unintelligent or uninformed. But this is a very different question than the one about why is trans in trans fat italicized or who decides on the capital lowercase. Obviously, these are different kinds of questions. This, from a dimension of inquiry perspective, is more like the dimension that we refer to as standard. There's another one called authority. This is about epistemological authority, about the authority to standardize weights and measures and so forth. And so something that you can do is you can ask yourself, did I think of that question? And so we have in the eventual quiz that we're going to put out there, you have three options. We'll show you one of the questions that someone else asked, and you could say, yeah, I thought of that. Actually, I thought of that. That was in my list, or something very, very similar to that was in my list. Another one is very interesting, which is, wow, I thought of that or something like it, but for some reason I shot it down. I filtered it out. Maybe I was worried it was irrelevant or sounded silly. That happens a lot. Like, things do occur to us, but our performative intelligence is still shutting those things down. We want to stop that. And then the third one is, wow, that never would have occurred to me in a million years. And so when you see this question, what is a calorie? Do you think that would have occurred to you or did occur to you when you were looking at the FDA label? Compare that to another question that I heard. This is a different workshop that Chris and I led. One of my favorite meaningless questions that was asked of this particular source. Why is the H in cholesterol, which is in the label, silent? This is beautifully meaningless and beautifully irrelevant. It is obviously operating along a different axis of interrogation, of inquiry than what seems obvious by the source. And so again, for Hrant and Ben and Jennifer and Chun, everyone in the audience, do you think this question would have occurred to you or did occur to you if you took the raffle? Yeah, I actually thought about that. I thought of that question. I wrote that down. Or funny, that crossed my mind, but I filtered it out. Or whoa, that's cool. I never would have thought of that in a million years. That just wouldn't have occurred to me. Over time, what you can do is figure out where your strengths, where your kind of natural strengths and unfamiliarities lie. So I've just taken a subset of the dimensions of inquiry that Chris and I made, bind, mimic, matter, pixel, crease, body, standard tone, there are others, and just did a hypothetical score that someone could score after this little quiz of like, yeah, this dimension pixel, which is this very meta kind of style of, if you're a pixel thinker, you're actually wondering about the refresh rate of my DLSR right now. You're thinking about the protocols of the transmission of simulcast. That's the kind of thinker and questions that a pixel thinker, it comes naturally to them. So maybe a hypothetical person is that really comes natural to them, but the bind dimension of inquiry, which encourages a person to think about how an object or an artifact or a concept is held together, for example, doesn't come naturally. And this is not a better or worse thing, but it is a place where it encourages you to say, like, yeah, you might want to take some vitamin bind and call me in the morning. You might want to practice matter to expand that dimension of inquiry, because next time you see an artifact, a primary source, or do Tom and Chris's raffle for some cool prize, then matter questions will start coming to you naturally. You'll unseat Hrant from the top lead, and you will be the one to win the next cool thing. So let me pause there, stop share, and come back over here. But this is basically what we're talking about how to ask brilliant questions. In the next Hangout, when we get together, I'm going to do these on a periodic basis. We're also going to talk about what you do with these meaningless questions once you have asked them. What do you just store them away in your file cabinet? The answer is no. That's when the fun begins. When you are able to sit down with a primary source, be it one that a stranger presents to you or one that you have found yourself, when you have the ability to generate not just 10 of these meaningless questions, but 100, 200, 300, 500, and I'm not joking here, meaningless questions, you are incredibly well poised to take the next step in the research process, whatever that research process is, whether it's formal research or research more broadly. Okay, let me go over here to Zoom to see if anyone has posted anything in chats or in comments, or let me go over here and before we log off. Okay, so over here in the chat, let's see. Okay, cool. Let me go over and check in over here in Twitter. We're over in a variety of different platforms. This is also a sort of test run of what it looks like to simulcast. But I do have about 1 or 2 minutes for some questions. If there aren't any, I'll go ahead and end this webinar. And then I will be posting this and sharing it back on the Where Research Begins YouTube channel, on my own YouTube channel, on X and LinkedIn and elsewhere. And I'll provide a link to the meaningless question flashcards, the sort of practice set that is just online and available. And then I'll be announcing the next raffle. And I already got the cool items. I went to this really lovely store just down the street that has freaking awesome stuff. And so you're definitely going to want to win one of the upcoming contests. So cool. All right. So we have, hey, thanks, Ben. I appreciate it so much. And you were so close. So please take part in the next one. And also, I really do mean it. If you are going to use meaningless question cards in your class, I think I saw you post something like that. I'm happy to do a class visit if you think that would be useful. And just anything that you think would be helpful. All right, so I think that's it for us today. I'll see you next time, and I hope that you take part in the next Meaningless Questions raffle. I'm so glad you asked. That's the little call sign. All right, see you later.